The sound of fabric tearing cut through the silence like a blade. Zara Williams stood in the center of O'Malley's tavern, her bare back exposed under the harsh yellow lights. The Delta Force tattoo etched across her skin stopped every breath in the room. Jake Rodriguez's knife gleamed in his trembling hand, his face twisted from arrogance to something else entirely. Fear. The air hung thick with tension as 30 pairs of eyes locked on the black woman who'd just shattered their understanding of power. But to understand why a single tattoo could freeze an entire bar full of hardened thugs, we need to go back 6 months to when Zara first walked through these doors, carrying secrets that would change everything. Zara Williams wiped down another glass with methodical precision, her movements deliberate and controlled like a sniper cleaning their rifle. Every 30 seconds, her eyes swept the room, exits first, then hands, then faces. A habit burned into muscle memory from years in places where vigilance meant survival. At 34, she stood 5'6" with a slender build that fooled most people into thinking she was fragile. They never noticed how she positioned herself with her back to the wall, or how her fingers instinctively found the balance point of every object she touched. Patrick O'Malley watched her from behind, the register, recognizing something in her silence that civilians never could. The 65-year-old Vietnam veteran had hired her without asking questions 6 months ago, understanding that some stories were written in scars rather than words. O'Malley's tavern wasn't much to look at. Worn leather stools, scratched wooden tables, and a jukebox that played the same 20 songs on repeat. But for Zara, the small room above the bar had become her fortress, her hiding place from a world that didn't know what to do with broken warriors. Every night she jolted awake at 3:17 a.m., the phantom weight of her M4 carbine pressing against her shoulder, the acrid smell of burning metal filling her nostrils. In those moments, her hand would reach for the spot where her rifle sling used to rest, finding only the raised tissue of old wounds. She'd learned to muffle her screams into the pillow, to time her breathing with the distant traffic sounds until the desert faded back into suburban reality. The heat of summer pressed against the tavern windows, but Zara wore long sleeves every shift, the fabric hiding the story written across her skin. Customers learned quickly that she communicated in nods and gestures, pouring drinks with an economy of movement that spoke of discipline rather than unfriendliness. When she sliced limes for the evening crowd, regulars would pause mid-conversation, watching how she held the knife. Not like a bartender, but like someone who'd used blades for purposes they didn't want to imagine. "That girl's got ghosts," Patrick had told his wife once. And she'd nodded, understanding that some ghosts wore uniforms and carried dog tags. Every Friday at 8 p.m., the rumble of Harley-Davidson engines would shake the tavern's windows, and Zara would watch the transformation begin. Conversations died mid-sentence. Couples suddenly remembered urgent appointments, and even the drunkest patrons sobered enough to settle their tabs and leave. The Steel Serpents Motorcycle Club, owned Friday nights at O'Malley's, had for the past 3 years, ever since Jake Rodriguez decided the old man's bar would pay for protection it never asked for. Patrick would count out $500 in worn 20s, placing them in an envelope he kept ready like a diabetic keeps insulin. Zara observed this ritual from behind the bar, her jaw tight, but her hands steady, having learned that survival sometimes meant choosing which battles not to fight. Last week had tested that resolve when Jake dragged David Park out of his electronics shop 2 blocks over, making an example of what happened when protection payments came up short. Zara had been taking out the trash when she heard the screams, saw Jake's boot connect with David's ribs again and again while his crew laughed and filmed it on their phones. Her body had coiled like a spring, muscle memory screaming to intervene. But she'd forced herself to turn away, to remember why she couldn't afford to be noticed. The guilt of that moment had burrowed deep, another scar to add to her collection. That night, she'd bent to pick up a broken bottle, and her collar had shifted just enough to reveal the puckered scar along her jaw, a souvenir from Kandahar that usually stayed hidden beneath carefully styled hair. The sound of motorcycles grew closer now. and Zara felt the familiar tightness in her chest. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in Afghanistan, now making her hands shake as she arranged. Bottles behind the bar. Patrick's weathered fingers trembled as he prepared the envelope, and their eyes met across the room. Two soldiers from different wars recognizing the same weight in each other's shoulders. Something was different tonight, though. Zara couldn't name it yet. The air tasted metallic, like blood or ammunition, and her instincts screamed warnings she'd learned never to ignore. What would happen next would shatter 6 months of carefully constructed invisibility. But Zara didn't know that yet. All she knew was that her hands had stopped shaking, and that felt like a very dangerous thing indeed. 8. Harley-Davidson motorcycles roared into the parking lot like mechanized thunder, their chrome pipes spitting, defiance at the quiet suburban night. Jake Rodriguez dismounted first, 6'1" of sculpted hatred wrapped in leather and denim, his arms covered in tattoos that told stories of violence earned rather than inked. He kicked open the tavern, door hard enough to crack the wood, savoring how conversations died and eyes dropped to study suddenly fascinating drink surfaces. Behind him, Marco Bulldog Santos and 4 other steel serpents formed a wall of intimidation, their presence transforming the cozy bar into a cage. Jake's scarred knuckles cracked as he flexed them, a sound like breaking bones that made Patrick flinch from across the room. "Well, well, Patrick." Jake's voice carried the kind of casual cruelty that came from never facing consequences. He grabbed a chair and flipped it backward, straddling it like a throne while his eyes swept the room with predatory satisfaction. "Business looks good tonight. Real good. Which means you've been holding out on me, old man." Patrick's hand shook as he pushed the envelope across the bar. "That's everything we agreed on, Jake. Same as always." But Jake wasn't interested in agreements tonight. He was interested in power, in the sweet taste of fear that flavored every interaction. "Agreements change, Patrick. Economy's tough. My boys need more. 800 a month starting now." The words hung in the air like a noose tightening around Patrick's throat. "Jake, please, I can't afford—" The slap came fast, Jake's open palm, connecting with Patrick's cheek hard enough to snap the old man's head sideways. Marco laughed, a sound like grinding gears, while the other bikers spread through the bar like an infection, deliberately knocking over drinks and stepping on fallen napkins with muddy boots. Jake grabbed a full beer from a nearby table and poured it slowly onto the floor, his eyes never leaving Patrick's face. Clean that up. But his gaze had found Zara, who'd stepped forward with a bar towel. "Well, hello there. Didn't know Patrick kept pets." Zara moved with careful precision, kneeling to soak up the spilled beer while positioning her body between Jake and Patrick. Her movements were too smooth, too calculated, and Jake noticed. "What's your name, girl?" The racial slur he'd almost used hung unspoken but present, poisoning the air between them. Zara didn't respond, just continued cleaning. But her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Jake's boot pressed down on her hand, pinning it to the floor. "I asked you a question. You deaf as well as dumb?" Still, Zara said nothing, though the tendons in her neck stood out like cables under tension. Patrick tried to stand, blood trickling from his split lip. "Her name's Zara. She just works here, Jake. Leave her out of this." What makes a person with elite military training so dangerous? Their ability to wait, to endure, to choose the perfect moment to strike. But Jake Rodriguez had never faced a real warrior, only civilians too scared to fight back. Zara. Jake rolled the name around his mouth like cheap whiskey. Pretty name for Patrick's, the slur landed like a grenade, but Zara's only reaction was a slight tightening of her jaw. She stood slowly, towel in hand, and met Jake's eyes with a steadiness that made Marco shift uncomfortably. "Ooh, this one's got some spine," Jake grinned, showing teeth like broken tombstones. "I like that. Makes it more fun when they break." He shoved Patrick again, harder this time, sending the old man crashing into the shelves behind the bar. Glass shattered, whiskey mixed with blood on the floor, and something shifted in Zara's posture. subtle but definitive, like a safety being switched off. That's not how you solve problems. Her voice cut through the chaos with military precision, each word measured and controlled. The entire bar froze. Jake's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, amusement, then rage. Did this woman just tell me how to run my business? Marco and the others formed a tighter circle, their hands drifting toward concealed weapons. Zara didn't move, didn't blink, just held Jake's stare with the kind of calm that comes from facing death and finding it wanting, I said. Jake stood, his full height looming over her. Do you know who I am? What happened next would transform O'Malley's Tavern from a sleepy suburban bar into a battleground where true strength would be measured not in muscles or numbers, but in the courage to stand when everyone else kneels. Jake Rodriguez charged. Like a bull, 220 pounds of rage aimed at the black woman who dared challenge his authority. Zara sidestepped at the last microsecond, using his momentum to send him crashing into a table that exploded into splinters. The other bikers surged forward but stopped when Zara grabbed a broken bottle, holding it with the practiced grip of someone who'd wielded worse weapons in darker places. "Stay back," she commanded, and something in her voice, that bone-deep authority, made even Marco hesitate. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face purple with humiliation, and lunged again. This time, Zara didn't dodge. She met him head-on, her smaller frame somehow absorbing his impact, redirecting his force with techniques that didn't belong in any street fight. Her elbow found his solar plexus, her knee drove into his thigh's nerve cluster, and suddenly the bigger man was gasping, off balance, confused. "You little—" Jake's hands found purchase on Zara's shirt, fingers digging into the fabric as they grappled. Zara twisted, trying to break free, but Jake's grip was iron. The sound of tearing cotton split the air like a gunshot. Time slowed to a crawl as Zara's shirt gave way, revealing the canvas of her back to the harsh tavern lights. The tattoo sprawled across her dark skin like a declaration of war. The distinctive Delta Force insignia, sword and 3 lightning bolts, surrounded by intricate military imagery. Below it, in stark lettering, SGT Zara Williams, Purple Heart recipient, Operation Enduring Freedom, 2019-2022. A pair of detailed dog tags were inked at the base with "Never Forgotten" etched beneath them. The artwork was beautiful and terrible, professional military tattoo work that told a story of service, sacrifice, and survival. The bar fell silent as a grave. 30 people collectively held their breath, processing what they were seeing. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if paying respect. Jake's hands dropped to his sides, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Marco Santos, who'd done 2 tours in Iraq before turning to crime, recognized the insignia immediately. His face went pale beneath his beard. "Holy shit," someone whispered. "She's Delta." The words rippled through the crowd like electricity. Delta Force, the Army's most elite special operations unit. Warriors so classified that most of their missions would never be known. And not just any Delta operator, but a Purple Heart recipient. She'd bled for her country, and here she was, serving drinks in a run-down tavern. But Jake Rodriguez had built his reputation on never backing down, and his pride wouldn't let him process what he was seeing. His confusion curdled into something uglier, mockery born from fear. "Oh, this is rich," he sneered, though his voice cracked slightly. "Patrick's got himself a broken toy soldier." "What's wrong, sweetheart? Still hearing the bombs in your head?" He circled her now like a hyena testing. "Wounded prey. Purple Heart, huh? That means you got hurt, means you failed." Zara stood motionless, her exposed back straight, hands loose at her sides, but her breathing had changed, become shallow and rapid. "How many of your squad came home in boxes because you weren't good enough?" Jake pressed, sensing weakness. "Do you see their faces when you close your eyes? Do their families know you're hiding in this shithole instead of—" How many times can a warrior's heart break before it becomes unbreakable? Zara had asked herself that question every night for 2 years. and now she finally had her answer. Theek. Flashback hit like an IED. Sudden, violent, undeniable. She was back in Kandahar province, the taste of dust and cordite filling her mouth. The explosion had flipped their MRAP like a toy, and Specialist Rodriguez was screaming, his leg gone below the knee. She dragged him to cover while taking fire, her shoulder blooming with pain where shrapnel found gaps in her armor. "Stay with me, Rodriguez. Stay with me." But there were too many wounded, not enough hands, and the medevac was taking fire. She'd made choices that night, decisions about who to save first, and those choices followed her home like ghosts. Her hands shook now, that familiar tremor that meant her PTSD was winning. Jake saw it and smiled, thinking he'd found her breaking. "Point. There it is," Jake crooned. "The crazy showing through. What are you going to do, hero? Cry? Run away like you ran from—" But Zara wasn't running. She was transforming. The shaking stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by something else, a stillness that preceded violence the way lightning preceded thunder. "You know nothing about sacrifice," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every flag-draped coffin she'd saluted. "You know nothing about carrying the weight of other people's lives in your hands, about making impossible choices in impossible situations." She turned to face him fully, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. "You want to know what this tattoo means? It means I've been to hell and back. It means I've paid prices you can't imagine for freedoms you don't deserve." The crowd stirred, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night. Patrick pulled himself upright, blood still on his chin, but pride in his eyes. "That's enough, Jake." An older man in the corner spoke up. Turned out he was a Marine veteran from Desert Storm. "You're talking to a goddamn hero." Others found their voices, their courage. "She served our country while you were selling meth to teenagers," a woman added. Marco looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight as his worldview cracked. But Jake's rage had nowhere to go but forward. His hand went to his belt, and suddenly there was a knife in his fist, 6 inches of serrated steel that had ended arguments before. "I don't give a damn what uniform she wore," he snarled. "In here. I'm the only authority that matters." What happens when unstoppable rage meets immovable courage? O'Malley's Tavern was about to find out. The knife flashed toward Zara's throat, but her hands moved faster. Muscle memory forged in life-or-death seconds half a world away. She deflected Jake's wrist with her left forearm, while her right hand snaked around, finding the pressure point that made his fingers spasm open. The knife clattered to the floor as Zara continued the motion, using Jake's own momentum to flip him over her hip in a textbook throw that would have made her combatives. Instructor proud, Jake hit the floor hard enough to drive the air from his lungs, and before he could recover, Zara had him in a control hold. Not the brutal choke he deserved, but the measured restraint of a professional. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, her knee pressing into his spine just enough to keep him immobilized. "But I will protect those I care about. That's what soldiers do." The transformation in the room was electric, like watching people wake from a collective nightmare. Marco Santos stepped forward, but not to help Jake. Instead, he kicked the fallen knife further away. "Stay down, Jake," he said quietly. "You've lost." Other patrons found their courage in Zara's example. The Marine veteran from the corner stood, then another, then a young woman whose brother was serving overseas. Soon, 30 people were on their feet, forming a protective wall between Zara and the remaining steel serpents. "This is our bar," Patrick said, his voice stronger than it had been in years. "And she's one of us." The bikers looked at each other, confused and outnumbered, their usual intimidation tactics useless against a community that had found its spine. Jake struggled against Zara's hold, spitting curses, but she maintained control with minimal force. Enough to restrain, not enough to injure. The police arrived in force. Someone had called during the fight, and Detective Lisa Chang entered with 4 uniformed officers, her hand on her service weapon. She'd been building a case against the steel serpents for 18 months, But witnesses always recanted too. Scared to testify, tonight was different. He pulled a knife on her, Patrick said immediately. We all saw it. The chorus of agreement was overwhelming. He's been extorting businesses for years, the Marine veteran added. $500 a month. From Patrick, more from others. Marco Santos stepped forward, and Jake's eyes widened in betrayal. I'm done with this, Marco announced. Detective Chang, I'll tell you everything. The drug deals, the protection racket, where we keep the books, all of it. The silence that followed was deafening. You fucking rat, Jake wheezed from the floor. But Marco just shook his head. I followed you because I thought you were strong. But she, he gestured at Zara, who was helping Patrick to a chair. She showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about hurting people weaker than you. It's about protecting them, even when it costs you everything. 2 other Steel Serpents members nodded, stepping away from their bikes. We're out too. Detective Chang's body camera captured everything as witnesses gave statements. The security footage from O'Malley's system showed Jake's assault, the knife, attack, and Zara's measured response. Combined with hate crime charges for the racial slurs, Jake was looking at serious time. His family's money might buy good lawyers, but it couldn't erase video evidence or 30 witnesses with matching stories. The story exploded across social media within hours. Female Delta Force veteran defends bar from racist biker went viral, shared by military groups, women's organizations, and civil rights advocates. News crews appeared the next morning, but Zara wasn't hiding anymore. She stood in front of O'Malley's tavern wearing a tank top, her tattoo visible for the world to see, and spoke truth into microphones. For 6 months, I tried to hide who I was, thinking my scars made me weak. But real strength isn't about hiding. It's about standing up for what's right, even when your hands shake. The interview clip was viewed 10 million times in 3 days. Donations poured in for O'Malley's Tavern. Veterans organizations reached out. Zara had become something she never expected, a symbol of resilience. But whose life changes most when the truth comes to light? Sometimes it's not who you'd expect. 3 months after Jake Rodriguez's empire crumbled, he sat in federal prison, his criminal enterprise dismantled and his family disowned. The Steel Serpents, once a formidable gang, had disbanded, their members either incarcerated or scattered to the wind. In their place, a new kind of community had begun to form. Marco Santos, a victim of Jake's extortion, opened an auto shop, dedicated to hiring and supporting veterans, offering a second chance to those who'd served. But the most profound changes happened at O'Malley's Tavern. What was once a gritty, run-down bar became a sanctuary for veterans battling PTSD. Every Thursday night, Zara Williams, once the bar's quiet and reclusive bartender, led support groups. She shared her own story of pain and recovery, teaching others that isolation wasn't safety. It was just another kind of prison. Her bravery inspired a national conversation, and soon she was consulting with the VA about improving PTSD treatment, and even testifying before a congressional committee on the unique challenges faced by female veterans. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything, and Zara was a different woman. The long sleeves she used to hide behind were gone, replaced by a black tank top that proudly displayed her Delta Force tattoo. She worked alongside Patrick, her legal partner in the bar, who now treated her like the daughter he'd never had. The tavern itself had transformed. The air, once thick with the presence of thugs, now buzzed with the chatter of veterans and their families. A new wall of honor displayed photos of local veterans, a testament to the community they had built. One evening, a young Latina woman entered the bar. Her military bearing was unmistakable, and her eyes, haunted and constantly scanning for threats, spoke of a 1,000-yard stare that Zara knew intimately. The woman, who introduced herself as Carmen Lopez, was an army medic recently returned from Syria. She confessed to seeing Zara's story online and had been too afraid to enter the bar for over an hour. Zara immediately came from behind the bar to meet her. She led Carmen to a quiet corner booth and shared her own story of hiding from her shadows. "I thought my scars made me weak," Zara confessed, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the shrapnel wounds on her forearm. "But these aren't signs of failure. They're proof of battles survived." Carmen, still visibly shaken, admitted she couldn't stop seeing the faces of the soldiers she couldn't save. "They never leave us," Zara said, "but we honor them by living, by helping others fighting the same battles." Patrick, sensing the moment needed more comfort than alcohol, brought them 2 cups of coffee, silently acknowledging the bond between the 2 veterans. Zara continued, "Strength isn't about hiding wounds. It's about sharing them so others know they're not alone." The transformation of O'Malley's caught national attention. The model, a safe space where veterans could gather, find support, and connect, began to be replicated in cities across the country. Marco Santos, a frequent visitor to the tavern, told Zara she had saved his life not just from Jake, but from the person he was becoming. Detective Chang, now a regular at the bar, delivered the biggest news yet. The Department of Veterans Affairs had approved a national grant to expand the O'Malley's model. They wanted Zara to be the national coordinator. The celebration was interrupted by a call from a U.S. senator inviting Zara to testify before the Armed Services Committee. 6 weeks later, she stood before Congress, her tattoo visible beneath her professional blazer. She spoke with the authority of lived experience. She told them about the 22 veterans who take their own lives every day, not because they are weak, but because they are fighting alone. She argued they didn't need more statistics. They needed connection, understanding, and the courage to show their scars. The proposal passed unanimously. Returning home, Zara understood that her war wasn't over. It had simply changed battlefields. Her most important work was still at O'Malley's on Thursday nights, where change happened one person at a time, one story at a time. Carmen, now a regular, co-led support groups, paying forward the hope she had found. The tavern, once a place of darkness, was now a beacon of light for veterans in need. A new sign now hung above the door: O'Malley's Tavern. Veterans welcome. Safe space. No one fights alone. Her phone buzzed again, a call from a veteran in crisis. "This is Zara," she answered without hesitation. "You're not alone. Let's talk."